I am California of the past.
I am California of the past.
I
am
am
California of the past.
I'm Commander Paul Anderson, retired Coast Guard. I've lived in Alameda since 1979. I spent 20 years in the Coast Guard, joining in 1966, retiring in 1986. My primary job when I was in the Coast Guard was vessel inspection, which included charter boats, high-speed ferries, tour boats, big container ships, oil tankers, natural gas ships, etc. I was the chief of inspection for Northern California for the Coast Guard from 1979 till 1986. The Coast Guard is on Coast Guard Island here in Alameda, and I believe the Coast Guard has been there since World War II. Up until approximately 1982 or 3, it was used as a boot camp for new recruits. Once the boot camp was closed down, the Coast Guard consolidated all of their offices from around the Bay Area onto Coast Guard Island. Coast Guard Island, as far as whether the state of California has any jurisdiction over it, the answer is no. It's just like any other federal property in Washington, D.C., or a Navy base that used to be here in Alameda. It's totally federal property, and that's why all bases, including Coast Guard Island, have their own police force, security force, as well as their own fire department. One of the biggest offices we had was for search and rescue, and that office controlled all the search and rescue operations in the Pacific Ocean. My last duty in the Coast Guard, there was a fishing boat, wooden fishing boat named the Jack Jr., which had been run over by a vessel outside of Point Reyes, California, and all 3 people were drowned. So the Admiral assigned me to do what was called a one-man formal investigation of that accident. We ended up Coast Guard Island doing hearings for approximately 2 weeks. We ended up actually hiring a Navy unit from San Diego who had an underwater remote camera. They searched for the fishing boat, which had been sunk. It took them 3 days, but finally they located the vessel. And by comparing that to the track we had of the tank vessel, Golden Gate, we determined that the Golden Gate had to have hit the fishing vessel and sunk it. We ended up turning over that investigation to the U.S. Attorney for criminal prosecution, but nothing was ever done, unfortunately. In 1970, I was assigned to an icebreaker based of all places in Long Beach, California. And that was an extremely interesting experience. I was on there for a year. We went down to McMurdo Sound in Antarctica, broke the ice for the resupply ship that brought in supplies and fuel. They had about 30 people, I believe, that would winter over, meaning that they lived at the South Pole for the year. Quarters were under the ice cap. They were about 60 feet under the ice cap, which basically kept it insulated, and they didn't have to use so much fuel to keep the heat. And it was interesting when we flew in there, there's a scientific thing where the Earth basically precipitates on its axis, which means it kind of rotates, kind of moves around its own axis. So as you come into the South Pole Station, there's a cement slab with all the flags flying from the countries that are signatory to the convention. And they've got a big, almost like a barber pole in the center of it, commemorating the South Pole. And I asked the pilot, I said, is that really the South Pole? He said, no, the South Pole is that little 2x4 over there about 50 feet to your left. And that was what they do, is they move that 2x4 every year to the actual pole itself because of this perception of the Earth on its axis. After I retired in 2000, I took a job with the Alameda Ferries as the operations manager. There are actually two ferries in Alameda, one that runs out of Harbor Bay and one that runs out of the west end of Alameda near the old Naval Air Station, now called Alameda Point. The one out of Harbor Bay was actually started by Ron Cowan, the developer out there. Now it's strictly a commute service, but the people at Harbor Bay absolutely love it. The other ferry is out of the west end of the island. Now it was started as a direct result of the Loma Prieta earthquake. They had started a ferry out of Alameda the Monday after the earthquake. The earthquake was on a Thursday, I believe it was, and the Army Corps of Engineers actually came in, made a parking lot with just gravel at that time, and built a dock in 48 hours so they could start running a ferry on Monday morning. In fact, I had to go to San Francisco the Monday after the earthquake to do some consulting work, and I ended up taking the ferry over to San Francisco, and strangely enough, as I was getting off, my old boss at Red and White Fleet, who I had run ferries for before, saw me and said, "Oh, you need to start running this ferry for us tomorrow." I said, "No, I'm not particularly interested." And she said, "Yeah, you need to do your part for the earthquake, so you're going to run this ferry for a while." So I ended up actually running that ferry until the Bay Bridge was repaired. That's about it for me.